All right, welcome everybody to the Sprint Jump Throw Performance Podcast. I'm Joel Reinhardt along with co-host Andrew Cormier. Very lucky today to have on Jordan Nieuwsma. He is the Associate Director of Sports Performance at Elon University. And also me and him grew up together, known each other since we were like 5 years old, grew up in the same church. So it's kind of fun to have old friends be in the field. But thanks for coming on, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm super excited to be here. I love all the stuff you guys are doing and just the great quality content you guys have been putting out there. And yeah, like Joel said, I thought I was going to get on here and be able to say like, I've known Joel the longest out of any guest, but then right before this, you had your dad on, so I can't. No, it's super cool to see you guys and see your careers and how they've been going. And I mean, I gained so much from both of you guys and just all the posts and all the podcasts as well. So it's been sweet.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it. Cool. We're going to hop right into it. We were talking a little bit beforehand. You do a lot of great collaboration work with your men's soccer coach, bleeding some of your weight room stuff onto the field and, transitioning it, not just, making sure it's not just, hey, I handle the weight room and, maybe give you a little bit of insight on practice conditioning.
Yeah.
But it seems like you guys have a really good relationship and you've posted about it before. So I know this is a very broad question, but just start with like, how did that get started? And, it's a good perspective to have of like people going into a new situation, maybe of like, how do you start those conversations? And then how does it build as you've been there for a couple of years?
Yeah. So I'm going on now about a year and a half working with men's soccer. And it was interesting when I first took over working with them. I have experience with soccer in the past, but more on the women's side and a couple other sports where I'm more comfortable. And getting into men's soccer was interesting because right when we started out, season was here and we were training. But when it came to like setting the schedule, it was, hey, we're not going to come to the weight room this fall. I was like, oh, okay. This isn't a good start. So we got to fix that a little bit at least. Yeah. So understanding that they were, and soccer players in general, I guess I could make a general term here, but they get very scared in season of being sore. And they rightfully so their practices are very intense. Their games are very intense. There's a lot of sprinting, a lot of change of direction, a lot of hamstring work that causes some issues. And we can run into groin issues, hamstring issues, and hip flexor issues and stuff like that are the really common ones. So yeah, I can understand like they do a very good job of player monitoring and player loading. So they were just very hesitant of putting more load on the guys. And so realizing I'm coming into this situation where there's probably not a lot of trust there. There's not a lot of buy-in from maybe the coaches and the former players that were on last year's team. And so figuring out how I could still have an impact and make sure we're giving the athletes good quality performance training and preparation for their sport. And so how that kind of came about was talking with him and they don't have to come in the weight room, but there's definitely some things we can do on the field for them that's going to help them and still keep our number of injuries as low as possible. So kind of being out there, watching practice, seeing what they do, and then trying to figure out where I can implement some stuff and where we can kind of collaborate, like Joel was saying. Came in originally, it was like, okay, you're going to have 15 minutes at the beginning of warm-up to warm up the team, get them ready for practice, and then we got them for the rest of the hour and a half or whatever it is. And as we're kind of going through, seeing like the things that they do really well, and from a soccer perspective, they do a really good job, like I said, player monitoring. They do a really good job from the perception action component, even though, and we can get down into this in a little bit, but even though they might not necessarily have the ecological dynamics or ecological psychology theory behind why they're doing it, they just break down the game and put little elements of the game in there. And that's all I'm trying to do as well when I'm doing different agility or skill acquisition type things. So realizing that they already do a lot of really good things, we just needed to make sure we're bringing along that physical development side with that skill and tactical development side as well. So It was honestly, I bet you I would have to give Coach Revo majority of the credit in that collaboration of how we did this, was because we're just trying to figure out how we can maximize the time, and looking at different research of how to structure practice as well. Anytime you look at that, you're going to find that randomized practice is going to be way better than a blocked practice approach. So instead of going 15 minutes, prep or warm up, 15 minutes indie, 15 minutes small group, 15 minutes large group, it works better to mix those in and out and make it a little bit, keep the athletes on their toes a little bit more. So what we did and what we decided to do was basically I broke up my performance prep into 4 different sections usually, where I'm going to hit my mobilization or just getting them moving. I'm going to hit my, the potentiation, and then I'm going to hit my activation as well. So basically the first part is that range of motion. The second part is the activation, getting the different muscles that we want firing properly. And then the third part is that potentiation part. And I break the potentiation part down into perception, action, coordination, into exploration, into jump prep and speed prep. So realizing I have all of these different categories, and then basically what we would do is coach would give me the athletes. I'd basically be on the field. They'd be all at their different positions. Right where they were, we'll hit 2 minutes of full range of motion, working through our mobilization part of the prep. Then they go back to their coach where they're at. He's going to have them maybe do a passing drill or a low intensity sort of ball skill work. 2 or 3 minutes. Then they come back to me. 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to hit activation of the different muscles or muscle groups that we're trying to hit. Go back to coach. They start increasing the intensity a little bit, add in maybe a defender, little pickle in the middle or offense defense type of skill work in there. And then we go back to myself after about 2 or 3 minutes. Then I'll hit that potentiation part. So getting some jump prep in there, some exploration, get them moving all over the place. And then go back to coach. He hits another skill development. I don't know, I guess pickle in the middle is what I like to call it. They do a lot of that stuff, or just different, do some different tactical kind of arrangements of where they got the guys and what angles they're trying to pass at, or goals that they have. And then coming back to me, finishing with a little speed prep, getting them ready to go. In season, if it was 3 days after a game and 2 days before a game, we'd hit like a little bit of a speed session. So touch, an excel, and a float for usually get them up to excel for 20, float for 10, something like that. And then they'd be back out to a full practice. So it's just kind of marrying these ideas of randomized practice, the different performance prep areas that I want to hit, and then working with coach to making sure we're getting that perception action side and, still increasing that intensity as we go throughout their drills. And that's the other thing too, is within each category of warm up, I like say the mobilization, I want to hit some hip extension, mobilization, or some hip flexor, range of motion. I'll hit that every day, but every day I'm going to hit a different variation of hip extension, stretch, or mobilization. So keeping it fresh, where we're not just, okay, we're 20 minutes, warm up, gets boring, gets repetitive, and then also keeping it fresh for every day, and basically hitting a different variation of that movement. So yeah, that's kind of what we've come to on that. And then the other thing is, because we weren't going in the weight room, we would also have a section that was microdosing. So either in that activation or that potentiation block, we would hit a little bit more stressful stuff. So we'd hit Nordic curls, we'd hit Copenhagen's, ISO holds, and a couple of other variations like that. We'd bring bands out, do some lateral push to move with bands, or manual resistance with a partner, going lateral crossover step, lateral push to move, to make sure we're still getting some overload to those tissues and keeping the areas like the ankles, the groins, hamstrings, those areas strong that we know are going to cause issues if we neglect them over the season. So we were thankful to have a really successful season as far as keeping guys available and keeping guys healthy and off the injury report list. So that's kind of the rundown of our collaboration as far as performance prep, microdosing, and on the field work. And now come a year from now, guys are in the weight room 4 times a week. And we've been able to really build that trust where coaches realize I'm basing everything off of their sport, making sure that we're still fresh enough for the practices that we need to be fresh enough for, and strong enough, and just building the right areas up that we need to.
Yeah, that's great. I know there's one aspect that you did implement as well that we actually talked about it with Andy Ryland, I think, when he was on. Yeah. Was some of the just like, you don't think of having to do contact prep for soccer, but it is something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was you who put it up first that like sparked it when I was like, oh, soccer, that makes sense, of like, battling for the ball and leaning on each other, like set pieces in the, there's a corner kick and it's the 10 seconds leading up to when the ball is actually kicked. Like, people are leaning on each other and not prepared for that. It needs to be implemented. So where did that fit in that model that you were talking about?
Yeah. So kind of came across that too, looking at Andy Ryland stuff and looking at a couple other things that we're doing. And it started with football. Obviously, we would implement a lot of that stuff with our big guys and how we would prepare them for contact prep. But then looking at other sports like basketball and soccer, if you ever played soccer, you realize there's so much jostling with an opponent. There's so much like boxing out or squaring up an opponent to get that right angle. And I noticed it a lot when last year we had a bigger attacker, and he was our whatchamacallit? I forget the proper term for soccer, but it's like our target forward. Mm-hmm. So basically he goes down, he just posts up, they pass it to him, and almost like the triangle offense in basketball, where then he's going to kick it back out to someone else, and you have the advantage right there. So you have to be able to hold that ground. You have to be able to dig in, but then also have the speed and the coordination to stay in front of someone if it's on the defensive side. So basically how I got to that was in my weight room stuff. I try and attack everything from, we're trying to realizing in the weight room, there's some things that the weight room benefits and there's some things that it has a little benefit to. So the biggest benefits that the weight room are going to have are we're going to be able to improve our change of direction speed. So our body's ability to withstand or decelerate, withstand, and transmit force in all directions. And then our injury resiliency. And those can kind of go hand in hand with, you see right now with a lot of the NFL injuries and stuff like that. But being able to decelerate, withstand, and transmit force in, I like to say, all 8 vectors. So when you think of, a lot of people talk about triplanar motion, right? So you have your sagittal plane, forward and backward, right? Your frontal plane, so lateral, and then your transverse plane, so rotational. But when we watch someone play on the field, they move in all different directions. So in order to kind of simplify that down a little bit and have it be useful in the weight room, I use kind of like an 8-vector approach where we're trying to train all 8 vectors. So you have forward and backward, that's 1 and 2. You have forward at a 45, that's 3 and 4. You have lateral, and then you have back at a 45. And then you could add in vertical and rotational as well. But breaking down all those different force vectors, we realize, we do a lot of vertical force, if it's squatting, split squatting, stuff like that. And then we have some movements in the lateral. I'd say most people just call a lateral squat lateral, but to me, that's not really how we move laterally on the field. So one of the main movements and areas that I like to focus on to, one, improve that change of direction speed, and then also to reduce their injury risk for groins and some hamstring issues as well is making sure that we're working in that lateral plane. So one of the ways that we do that is hip adduction, hip abduction. And so you could start with a very simplified version. And when I'm working with some of the freshmen, I'll break it down a little bit more so it's more single joint focused. And so they'll just be doing a standing cable or standing band, adduction, abduction of that leg. Okay, and then that's preparing the tissues to then go into more of a multi-joint lateral movement. So I like to use the push to move step. So that'd just be like a shuffle, and then a crossover step using more of that inside leg, which is going to more emphasize the adduction approach to it. So then working from there, I try and realize, okay, we want to work these different movements. And a lot of people might say they're doing it, but they're not overloading it. So they're not really creating much of a change. If I just do a 20-pound lateral squat with a dumbbell, have I really overloaded anything or made any change? No, probably not. And the forces that they're moving at on the field are a lot higher than that. So a couple of the ways that I like to overload it and get them a lot stronger in those lateral push to move steps and lateral crossover steps is a sled drag. So either using it handle wise or attaching it to a belt, loading it up, going lateral push to move, lateral crossover step with a sled. Also, we have some cables that are adjustable in our weight room. So we'll do a cable machine, attaching them so we're getting that lateral force. We're truly driving into the ground, moving laterally with it. And then we'll start to, as we get into our eccentric or dynamic phases, we'll do different variations with bands where it's exploding out or it's exploding in, having to stick and decelerate, or in and out. So getting that change of direction with that overload coming in with the band and then reversing that contraction on the way out. So those are kind of like my main, philosophy as far as training that change of direction in the weight room. But then realizing that the forces that they're facing on the field, they're not, carrying around a sled, they're not using a band. The forces that we're using on the field are a lot of times also, in that change of direction, having to deal with those forces, but also having to go against an opponent and jostle with an opponent, drive against an opponent, hold your ground, and being strong in those movements. So then we started to implement, okay, we can apply an overload, but we can just use manual resistance to do so. And to me, that's a lot more specific way of applying that force that's going to transfer a lot more on the field. And it's also giving them a little bit more of that perception action, having to adjust off of someone, how to use that leverage, how to drive into the ground, what positions are stronger, what positions are weaker. It's allowing them to interact with those dynamics that are also going to help them more on the field. So the main ones I do that with are, again, just going shoulder to shoulder, lateral push to move, hip to hip, lateral push to move, and then going shoulder to shoulder or hip to hip, lateral crossover step, and then going back to back, back pedal against that person, overloading those quads a little bit. So I really like those ones because of, like I said, that transfer and that overload effect to it. And then we'll do it in a way that sometimes we'll do it in a competition way where, okay, we're fighting for that line. I start on one side, you start on the other. We're pushing into each other, see who wins, going for 5 seconds or something like that. But if it's in the workout card, a lot of times I'll just prescribe it as manual resistance. And so that person that you'll go person against person, one person is actually working the movement and the other person is just resisting them and putting that foot in the ground. Usually we'll work about an 8 out of 10 for that person on a scale of 1 to 10. So that's kind of how I started to implement that. And then also, like I was saying earlier, how we were only doing stuff on the field. It's another great way to overload those key areas, those key tissues that we see a lot of issues come about with the groins and the hamstrings and stuff, and not having to go in the weight room and do so.
That's great. I mean, that's something like we had kind of talked about that with everyone coming back from just the current situation of having to keep a lot of teams outside at first. And once they could start to get close to each other, like hey, we can still train pretty freaking hard by having people actually work against each other with everything.
Yeah.
As my thought too, has coach implemented that at all, or asked for you to try to implement that at all from a practice scheme of tying in even more perception of actually working on a corner, have the guys work for 5 seconds, and then the corner comes in, and then it's you react to the ball. Has that happened at all yet?
Not in that specific scenario, no, but in a lot of the prep stuff as well, we will work those different competition aspects, and then we'll go into like, okay, we're jostling for a ball or something like that. So we'll isolate it and then implement it. But yeah, he likes it a lot. Like he's definitely for it and loves it every time we do it, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's overlooked. I mean, in my opinion, I feel like men's college soccer is one of like it's probably the most aggressive soccer, professional or collegiate. Like I get collegiate. I feel like dudes get pretty nasty in collegiate soccer.
For sure.
Like
it's a physical game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a physical game, and that's why I like it so much using that manual resistance approach, because yeah, we're overloading the movements in specific force vectors, but we are also using an implement that is specific to the sport. So that's the overloads that they're going to face in their competition field, right? So that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, actually, it kind of serves as a nice segue. You started getting into it a little bit with the 8-vector stuff, but I know me and Andrew both kind of we view change of direction through the physical side of change of direction through this lens. I know you do as well. It's kind of I guess originally kind of a Boo Scheck-Snyder influence for me, but it's, viewing, not just that specific multi-directional weight room work, that's more on the force side, but like when you really get into like the performance end of like, how are we going to help this kid get in and out of cuts faster? Like you trend towards using, multi-directional plyometrics as the kind of main tool. So what's your thought process leading into that? And then, we've kind of texted back and forth with some of your YouTube videos and all that, but then I guess ensuring that you're hitting all 8 vectors that you're talking about, while also, being aware that, maybe not, you don't have to hit all 8 in this day. Right. Like, so how do you go about organizing your thought process for that?
For sure. So I kind of got the idea for this. I got the idea for the 8-vector stuff when I was back at Minnesota working with Dustin Perry and Shea Thompson. They're with 49ers now, and that was one thing they emphasized a lot, was like, okay, if we want to prepare the tissues in a way that is, 1, reducing injury, and 2, going to see performance improvements, we got to improve that tissue in the motions that we're going to do on the field. Okay. So I had that one side that was a great influence then. I also got to know Tyler Yerby and Sean Mishka very well, who they use when it comes to sports skill or change of direction. They use a very ecological psychology approach, which takes into account a constraints-led approach model. And in a constraints-led approach model, just to give you the quick rundown, for I'm sure a majority of your listeners are familiar, but you have the individual, the athlete, you have the environment, and then you have the task constraints. So all 3 of those constraints and how the limiting factors in those constraints can all affect how that athlete moves and determine what direction they're going, how fast they're going, all of that. So like we have to, when we're talking about sport, we have to take all of those into account if we want to maximize the athlete. And then we also need to realize, like, within the individual constraints are, going back to that 8-vector stuff, the individual's restrictions to move in those 8 vectors. So if they're not strong enough, and I see this all the time with my freshmen that come in, you have them, you watch them on the field, or you have them do a change of direction drill. They are limited in how fast they can go or what angles they can go at because of either the strength or the ability to decelerate that force and then change direction in that. So one of the areas that I know I can have an impact on is by breaking down all of those different 8 vectors and making sure they're able to withstand, decelerate, and produce that force in all those directions. So it's something that's been helpful in that I'm someone that wants to, because also having that ecological psychology approach, I want to have a ton of variation in what I'm doing with my athletes. But I also want to make sure that I'm not leaving any stone unturned, where if I'm always throwing a guy into a open agility drill and he's more confident cutting off his right foot, going to his left at a 45-degree angle, he's going to probably try and do that more and more and more again.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's different things that we definitely can do to manipulate that and put them in their weak positions. But there's a reason why he's always cutting off his right and not his left, right? We need to make sure we're getting him stronger, or lack of a better term, stronger, but more, more powerful, more able to move in all 8 vectors, so that that's not his limiting factor. So when it comes to change of direction improvements, I already talked about some of the weight room stuff, but then the other 2 areas that I like to implement it are, like Joel said, multi-directional jumps, and then in conditioning or energy system development. So multi-directional jumps, I break it down in the progression of how I do it. So one, we'll start with extensive, then we'll go into intensive, and then into more of a shock or a plyometric method. And so the extensive one is always about 70%. The goal there is increasing that tissue ability to move in all those different directions, but under a controlled, more reasonable force, so that we're just preparing that tissue to do all those different movements. Then we go into the intensive one, which is going to be either usually about a single response, maybe a double response, max effort, trying to either cover as much ground, get as much height, or just get more maximum output into it. And then into the shock method, which is going to be more true to what's going to happen on the field, where they're coming in with a lot of speed, have to absorb or decelerate, withstand, and transmit that force into a different direction. And they have to do it with, having to deal with the stretch shortening cycle and all of that. So starting with that extensive stuff is very beneficial, because it, one, improves that fluidity of the athlete, that coordination. I also work with a sport like golf, where they're not big jumpers, but there is some benefits to increasing their lower body strength and power. Mm-hmm. And doing an extensive jumps, we'll get some guys that aren't most coordinated, and by having them work through those extensive jumps, they'll improve that fluidity, they improve that technique, that just coordination. And I guess that's what I mean more when I say technique, is they have coordination, they have the ability to control it, they have the ability to move where they want to move. And then when we're talking about a sport like soccer or football, then we can start to break down that sport and, okay, what are the different angles that they need to be able to change direction at quickly? And to go back to that 8 vector version, that's given me some structure and then allowed me to expound upon that and give the athletes freedom within that structure. So, like I said, we got the forward straight ahead. So that would be your broad jumps, your horizontal bounds, your skips, your horizontal hops. Then you have your, I guess I should probably touch on that too. But when I talk about jumps or hops or bounds, jumps are double leg to double leg, hops are single leg to single leg, bounds are single leg to the opposite single leg. So that's kind of the terminology we use to simplify it. And then we'll work going in that horizontal vector, that 135-degree cut angle, that 90-degree cut angle, that 45-degree cut angle, and that 0 or 180-degree cut angle. And those are just mimicking all the different possibilities of cuts that they're going to face on the field. So like I sent Joel this the other day, but trying to break that down in a way that we can do and have a little bit more structure with it is we'll break it down. Usually our acceleration days, we're going to hit more horizontal force vectors. We're going to hit more more lateral and more downhill versions of that, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then on our speed days, we would hit more vertical and then 135-degree angles that are going to be those quicker cuts, those more, my geometry terms a little bit off, but the opposite of acute, more that bigger angle for change of direction.
Obtuse?
Right.
Yes, I think it's obtuse. Yeah.
Obtuse, yeah, great.
Shout out geometry.
Yep. And then just following that extensive to intensive approach. So it's super cool because, I mean, even just doing it myself or our staff doing it, it's easy to see how quickly you can identify an athlete's weak area or weak leg or weak angle that they're not very good or comfortable at cutting at. And then we can manipulate that and continue to develop that fluidity or develop that coordination in that angle that is going to be a direct transfer to the field. And not to get into anything too controversial here, but when you're talking about comparing power methods, it's just something that you can't do Olympic lifting wise, where there's a ton of benefits to Olympic lifting, right? But you can't do a clean at a 45-degree angle on one leg that you're going to do on the field, right?
Oh, come on, you can try.
Yeah. And so the easiest way I can connect that back to you for the field is if you look at a wide receiver, you look at their route tree.
Yeah.
They have basically a straightaway or a go route. They have their post route, which is about 135-degree cut. Then you have an in or an out, which is going to be a 90-degree cut. And then you have their comeback cuts or the curls, which are going to be more of a acute or a 45-degree angle. So if we're able to really mimic those angles well in the weight room or when we're doing our jump work, that way they're only getting more and more reps in those positions so that they can plant and drive out of those cuts. And if we're talking about wasting time and doing things like ladders or a bunch of choppy feet work or fast feet work, and you're taking 10 steps into your cut, you're giving receiver or the defensive back a ton of time to catch up. But if we're able to overload those cuts by using jump and plyos, then the athlete's able to just put that foot in the ground, change direction, and accelerate out of it. And it's super cool to see by putting someone through that, how quickly they're able to pick up on that and how quickly it's able to transfer to the field and how much more explosive they are in and out of those cuts, and more confident they are to cut at every angle. And it just provides a huge value to them. And then also adding in that perception action stuff or the technical tactical knowledge or anticipation, then the athlete's really getting somewhere. But I think that's definitely a stone that we can't leave unturned as far as making sure we're covering all those different angles.
Yeah. I mean, I could see the benefit too, even just from a simple aspect of basic acceleration starts, just that small variation. Like, the kids will know that you're still looking for the same general principles of what you're looking for with acceleration, but just putting them on those weird spots. It might feel weird at first, but then they'll understand how to get back into essentially what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Kind of a nice challenge as well.
Yeah. That's why I like too using, if we're hitting a 135-degree cut today and a lateral like 90 degrees and a 45. So let's say we're hitting those three. One of them is going to be a jump that day. One of them is going to be a bound. One of them is going to be a hop. Mm-hmm. And the next time we do it, we'd rotate that where that 135 degree is now going to be a bound. The next one's going to be a hop. The next one's going to be a jump. So that way, like you said, just a ton of different variations of the same or similar thing to increase that coordination and, just developing them in a well-rounded manner.
Yeah, I believe it too, like the small variation, I could be wrong on the motor learning side of things, like that small variation in starts will actually help retention as well, long term.
Yeah.
From the day to day, or like in the session, apparently it's going to be worse, but then day to day it'll be better.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I really like that. I liked what you said where you're able to quickly identify like deficiencies, I guess. I haven't even noticed that. We're just women's lacrosse has been back for a few weeks, and even just from like some of the jumps we're doing on the field, and even just in the very small example of like an in-place vertical pogo versus, hey, add a little bit of side to side.
Yep.
And add a little bit of front back, or a little bit of rotation, where you're basically going like 45 to 45, like not even like a full one. It was like just that little variation.
Yeah.
Like some girls are really good on the front back, horrible on the side to side, and like decent on the rotational. And then some others figure out the rotational right away, but they're horrible side to side or whatever it is. So it's interesting to see. I like the way you put it, or just like it can identify, and that's even just a very small example of pretty much like organizing your shank and your midsection on those. But like, as you get into more complex things, I'm sure it gets, it becomes much more obvious, much faster if it was a, max effort broad jump immediately back into a 135-degree broad jump or something like that. I see that showing its
definitely. That's another benefit too, like you mentioned, is scaling it down to what they can handle. And if we're talking rehab, it's especially important where, or talking with a younger athlete, where we can start with, okay, we just want you to jump 45 degrees a yard at a time. If we're doing extensive, just a yard at a time. Our more advanced guys, they're probably going to be hitting 3 yards every single jump, covering some distance. But we can really scale it down to make it appropriate so that they are able to make those connections and allow things to adapt along the way.
Yeah, I really like that. And even too, like just thinking about, just being smart with your training time, because it's a limited resource. I know I've heard Nick talk about, like, that's one of his things of why he did end up dropping Olympic lifting, is just it's so time consuming.
For sure.
10 sets of clean, like it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And you could still, have the, a set of clean mixed in with, whether it's contrasted or complex, whatever the actual implementation ends up being. But you can include jumps there. And then it's just from a time perspective, it's hard to, like, hey, if we're hitting, like you said, we're hitting the 45, the 90, and the 135 and these different variations, like hitting all those variations also ends up being time consuming. And so depending on how much volume you're looking at. And so at a certain point, like, something's got to give.
For sure.
And, I guess it just comes down to prioritizing at that point.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, we've tried to analyze, because we did do Olympic lifting for a while, and I like it for a lot of aspects and stuff, but that was one of the ways that we came to the conclusion of not doing it is, I'll give you 2 examples. One is the motor firing pattern that you do during Olympic lifting. So if you're doing a clean from the floor and a clean, I get my verbiage right. If you're doing a clean, right, you're pulling from the floor, you're straightening your knees. Then once the bar comes across your knees, you got to rebend those knees, get in that power position, and then explode that bar up, right? And how many times or how many movements in sport do you straighten your knee and then rebend it and then apply force? None, right? Yeah. So and that's what one of the benefits about jumping is, that motor firing pattern is a lot more specific to the sport, where you're just, okay, jump, cover distance, cover some height, and then getting all those different variations. Again, we can get those different variations in jumping that we can't necessarily get with Olympic lifting. And we can also get a lot better high quality volume than we can in Olympic lifting, where in an extensive day, we might be hitting 40 different contacts. And have you ever done an Olympic lifting workout with 40 different reps? Probably not. And then even in our intensive or our plyometric days, we can get maybe 15, 20 reps of getting that impact in there. So yeah, it definitely helps us to maximize that time and improve transfer to the field.
Yeah. When you get into, because I know one aspect of, with football, we pretty extensively weightlift. And I guess really we utilize the clean a lot.
Yeah.
We don't really snatch. We occasionally will split jerk, like super on the light end of things, very speed oriented. But I mean, one aspect of that that's very nice is very quantitative and trackable, I guess.
Yeah.
And I know you utilize, and we do too, with trap bar jumps and whatever it's whether it's barbell squat jumps or trap bar jumps. And I know specifically with men's soccer, you've utilized a lot of the, whether it's loaded trap bar jumps in some sort of series. But is there ways, whether through, bar speed or ground contact or anything like that, that you use to, kind of quantitatively look at like, okay, we're hitting trap bar jumps today and it's at X amount of drop off in our vert, or is it any way that you track that quantitatively or no?
Yeah. We have done drop off before. The problem is just that we don't have enough either jump mats or tendos. So what we've done is we'll basically have their workout card, everything's planned. And then on the other side of the room, we'll have the jump pad with a set weight or set weights of that trap bar jump. Okay?
Gotcha.
And throughout their lift, they'll come and hit 1 or 2 or 3 reps on the jump mat. And then that's a way that we'll track it. We'd like to do percent drop off, or we'd like to do more a jump height based program ideally. And I do that on myself all the time and it works great. But we just don't have the technology means to do that on a daily basis, but we'll still track it on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everyone's going to hit a 135 jump. And then we've been able to do velocity profiling based on that, where guys that are our power guys or our bigger guys, it's crazy to see how well they jump with a lot of load and how quickly some of our smaller guys or our more springy guys start to drop off after you start throwing some load on them. But yeah, it's definitely something we try and track on a workout to workout basis.
Yeah, that's cool. I really like that. That's one thing that it wasn't like a loaded jump standpoint, but there's like a power equation that we use, and it was because with our roster, there were a lot of, whether it was super skinny skill guys or some like super big, like kind of body comp change, big guys, where we were tracking vertical jump longitudinally, but some guys, we had a lineman who went from 335 down to 320, and it's like, well, of course your vert's probably going to go up a little bit. You lost some weight, or a receiver who went from 185 to 195 over 8 weeks or something like that. And so we, using the power equation, ended up being cool because guys were able to be like, able to see, obviously, intuitively, like, oh, I went up 10 pounds and my vert went up an inch.
Yeah.
That's good, but it's nice to see it quantitatively. And like,
For sure.
You went up however many watts or whatever it was. And even cool, like across position groups, because, your left tackle comes out and jumps whatever he jumps. Like, even your worst receiver is going to jump higher than that. But it's cool to be like, watts across the entire team, and almost be like, regardless of body size, he put out the most watts, and then this linebacker was number 2, and D lineman number 3, and O lineman, or whatever it ends up being. So it was cool almost from a competitive standpoint across the team. And that could be, similar with like a, hey, 135 jump, like who's getting better height at that specific weight, or
Yeah.
That was something I like too with trap bar for me, like the jumps specifically was just my thought process with most of my women's teams was getting them even more skill practice with an even remotely like halfway decent landing position on a jump, like teaching that, especially the younger ones. Like instead of having to teach the skill of moving around the bar, it was like, hey, the same thing that you're trying to look for with certain landing, like we can still apply it here. Obviously you're going to have weird landings in sport, but like we're not just landing with like straight up vertical torso and then the same postures that are fairly associated with a lot of the ACL injuries. But like now we can just try to teach you a little bit more about like torso position along with your shin angle, like all of the same principles apply. It's just holding weight now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's a ton of ways to manipulate and apply jumping in a way that's going to affect sport in a positive manner. So it's a great tool for sure.
Yeah, cool. I know that the next topic we were going to touch on, I forget if you posted a little bit of it or if it was just Chula or if it was Elon's Sports Performance page. I don't know. I follow all you guys, so it ends up being I just see all you guys using like similar font or whatever, and I just forget who posted what. But it was getting into some of the game specific conditioning with tennis in an environment where you're not. I forget exactly whether it was NCAA rules. I don't work with tennis right now, so it's like I don't know what their restrictions are. But it's basically like some level of restriction around how many, tennis countable hours they can have, and then working around that to, use some of your basically strength and conditioning hours in that very specific environment without bleeding over into other, kind of NCAA hours. So I guess where did those conversations start? And, how did you get all the way to, the implementable product that?
So I think the video you're talking about is definitely Coach Loomis gave me the idea, and I've kind of been running with it and trying to tinker with it as well. So it's been fun to, toss that idea around a little bit. And then the other person that I've been talking to a lot about tennis specific stuff and tennis conditioning is Chris Borthwick, which I think you guys have had on, right?
No, we have not.
No, you should. He should be on soon. But
we've had people message us about him. So
he's the real deal. So
for sure.
So him and I are actually right now working on writing a book on energy system development, and a lot of this stuff is in it. And basically, it starts with when we talk about energy system development, there's 10 different variables that you can break down to make interval style conditioning, and then how you can manipulate those different variables in a way that is going to impact the sport in the way you want it. Mm-hmm. As we're going through that, you have the means that which you're applying those different intervals. And it starts with, more your general, just straight linear running or running, hitting the line, coming back. Then we start to get a little bit closer with getting more multi-directional movements in there. So let's say we're going lateral shuffles, going back pedal, carioca, different variations like that, which gets more of that local muscular endurance. That's going to help in all the different multi-directional movements you have to do in tennis. And then we get to a point where it's like, we've kind of developed the energy system so where we want them. They have the aerobic capacity, but yet their movements and the stresses that they're facing in the sport are still a little bit different than just a straight lateral shuffle or just a straight sprint. And so trying to, like we were talking back with that soccer stuff, getting more randomized with how we're applying those means. So you a rep of sprint, or not sprint, but like a tempo run, and you hit a rep of side shuffle, carioca, mixing in those different variations and keeping them on their toes with different versions. But then if you watch the sport of tennis, they're not just going straight down and back. They're not just going straight side to side. They're going at all those different 8 vectors, right? And so then we started to do that, but then have different cones out there of the different 8 vectors. So hitting a shuffle at all 8 vectors, then the next rep we're hitting carioca, making sure we're getting all the different movements, but at different angles, right? And I think it's worth saying, still staying within the different energy system demands of the sport. So usually a tennis is about, I think the average is about 10 seconds per volley and then 20 seconds between. So staying within there, sometimes we'll be above, sometimes we'll be below, different variations. But then we've kind of implemented those different angles, realizing, we're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. And then started to work with Coach again, realizing how he and she, for the guys and girls, they basically do a lot of that stuff with their skill work, and how we could work with them to do that skill work. And we'll throw a ball at them, have them hit it at this angle, throw a ball at them, hit it at that angle. But then the problem was right now with the different restrictions, we're only able to do 4 hours of tennis work and 4 hours of more conditioning or strength work. So we weren't using all of those in the weight room, and we weren't getting enough tennis in. So the coach and myself wanted to make sure that we're getting more tennis style of work.
Yeah.
And so that's now where we were kind of messing around with using some of that perception action stuff, where I think in the video that you've seen, basically what we do is have them go out there. There's a girl on one end and a girl on the other, and they're basically going through the motions like they're playing tennis. So, and then working back and forth, still working those intervals. So 10 seconds of work or 12 seconds of work, 20 seconds rest that they're going to work in tennis. And so that's on my go, but then the movements were all based on them. And then now we're starting to, after getting their feedback, the coach's feedback, we're starting to mix it up even a little bit more. So we'll have one version where they're reading the opposition. So they're reading the girl across the net from them. Okay, what angle are their shoulders at? What angle are they swinging at? Even though there's no ball and there's no racket, ideally we'd have both of those, obviously. But with our restrictions, they're still reading that and then predicting what direction the ball is going, and then running that direction, hitting it back, and going on that. And then the other version that we've been doing is they're not going against someone. They're just strictly visualization. And we all know the benefits of visualization, but then adding a motor component, even though we don't have the perception component, they're still able to work on different areas where there might be weaknesses or different movements that they need to improve. And they can start to do that in a visualization fashion with the work to rest ratios of energy system development. And then getting some of the girls' feedback, they also thought it'd be a good idea so we do those two versions. And then we also have a third version where they're basically the cones are set up at the 8 different angles. And then we're hitting a forward back pedal for that 10 seconds, but they're still hitting a ball, or proverbially like mimicking hitting a ball at the cone back and forth, then going side to side or going 45 degrees. And then basically how we're doing it is I'll have the cones out there, and then at any point I can switch the drill. So we'll keep them on their toes. We'll keep it randomized. I'll go, okay, we're hitting the cone 45 degree to the right and back. And so they're going back and forth. Then the next rep or the next set, I'll be, okay, you're playing against the girl across from you, or you're just visualizing that motion. So trying to tie into each other a lot of different components, because that is one thing that you do find is the more specific you get to the sport, great skill benefits, great movement benefits, but you lose some of those energy system overloads that you're trying to get if you're just strictly doing like a tempo run or something like that, a more simplified version. So trying to tie all their strengths together in a way that we can really accomplish our goals with that.
Yeah, that's great. I thought it was just like, just like, even if you weren't even working around an hour's restriction type thing, it's still valuable work and a great idea, especially like the visualization standpoint, and and just providing a novel stimulus to the athlete of like, I'm sure they love it. I mean, they probably, it gets them on that surface, especially tennis, like it's such a surface specific type thing, but just gets them in that sporting mindset. And I don't know, even just adding some of the other aspect of like, if I'm doing a tempo run, or even if it's like multi-directional, more specific type tempo, for all intents and purposes, you can pretty much shut your brain off. And that is just an aspect of the stress that's just gone. And so if I'm then adding into, a representative or more representative environment, me just freaking out and having a little bit of, not even all the way freaking out, but just adding in that little bit of like, okay, I'm having to think, like that could bump your heart rate up, 5-10 beats per minute, just from having to be like, okay, what's happening? Where are they hitting the ball? Like, even if you weren't running around, just, if you're sitting in the stands having to think about that, it's going to crank your heart rate up. So
Yeah.
it's
And
like,
I think
we hit all this tempo and we're smacking it, and then we get into the game environment and they don't look as in shape. Well, part of that could be, you're running tempo, you just get to shut your brain off.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's one aspect I really love about it too, is like the more I play tennis, the more I do try and read that opponent of, okay, like what angle is their racket at? What angle are their shoulders at? Where are their feet set? What kind of hit are they gonna put on the ball? And that's by adding that into conditioning, it creates such a more realistic and more beneficial approach to it. Still realizing that we're covering those energy system development bases, but also they're getting that practice and those reps of reading that person's body language and reading it. And ideally, I think when we get the restrictions taken off a little bit more, we'll do it with a racket. And then I think that'll only just carry over more and more to the sport. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And like you're saying, the enjoyment aspect, it just becomes so monotonous doing 40, 50 reps of tempo runs or something. And then like no one wants to do that. And no, the girls and the guys have both loved it. They enjoyed it a lot. And having different variations in there, I don't think is wrong at all. Where we do kind of taper it back a little bit sometimes and get a little bit more structured with it, but then also let them loose a little bit more just for that sake of, like you were saying, break up that monotony and keep them engaged.
Yeah, I'm sure it helps you from a coaching standpoint too, because and I think tennis is another famously weight room allergic sport. And so if you're showing, just showing the initiative of like, hey, we're clearly trying to help you get better at this sport. And, then being like, hey, and can we sneak in some RDLs or something like, it helps bridge that gap a little bit more. Like you were touching on with men's soccer, like, you meet them where they're at, and then you can slowly start to sprinkle in some of the other work that, some of those sports are, stereotypically kind of averse to in a typical situation.
And I have seen a lot of strength coaches struggle with that. And I'd say my position is a little bit unique because we're getting to where our administration does back our performance staff very, very well, in that we have the go ahead or the green light to kind of shut down anything that the coaches want if it's like unsafe for the athlete or not beneficial for their sport. And so we kind of have that power per se, but even if you have that influence or that power, still realizing how to use that in a way that is going to make all this work together, and realizing, okay, we have the same goal. We have the same goal of winning championships, developing great athletes, great individuals. Like all those big goals are all the same. So we need to make sure we're kind of humbling ourselves a little bit and realizing, okay, I've been working with tennis now for 2 years. When I started, I hardly knew how to keep score or anything, right? So realizing that we have to kind of lean into each other's strengths, and then through that development, then we can really get somewhere and really maximize it.
Yeah, it's nice to hear of situations where even if the athletes don't even fully realize the influence, or if somebody Jordan's our weights coach, if they're like introducing you to their parents or something, and you're like, it just like rips something out of your soul. But it's clear that, it's good for the athletes too. Like they know, like, not just from a coaching perspective of like collaborating with coaches and knowing that you're on their side, of just like an athlete perspective of like, oh, okay, I know they're not just trying to crank up my weight room numbers at all costs to boost their own egos. But we're actually trying to win some ball games and, build the plan that is best for that, knowing that our expertise is a little more on that physical development side. And so our influence ends up being a lot in that realm. But, at the end of the day, it's like you said, starting with the sport first and working back, everybody ends up benefiting more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Awesome. Probably a good song. Yeah. Cool. Sweet. Yeah, we'll just do like a clean ending and then be good to go. All right.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Thanks for Jordan. This was great. I know we had kind of the big points that we wanted to touch on, and
Good.
Did not disappoint. So appreciate you taking the time, and we
Awesome.
enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it. It's fun.
Yeah, no doubt.